I wasn't looking for anything permanent, just a paycheck. Something to stop the slow bleed of bills piling up on my desk and buy me a few more weeks before I had to move back in with my brother. So, when I saw the listing for an overnight security position at the Whitlow Historical Museum, it didn't matter that it was a graveyard shift, or that it was in the oldest, quietest part of town, or that the posting said experience preferred, must be comfortable working alone. That last line should have been my first clue. But desperation has a funny way of dulling your instincts. The museum itself was an old mansion turned exhibit hall, looming at the end of a dead-end street with iron fences, ivy-covered walls, and windows that never seemed to reflect light the right way. It looked more like a place where secrets went to die than where history came alive. I showed up for the interview 5 minutes early, figuring punctuality would help make up for the fact I had zero experience in museum work. A woman named Meredith met me at the door. She was pale and thin, with a severe bun and a voice like dry paper. Her handshake was limp, but her eyes were sharp. The kind of sharp that made you think she could read your childhood traumas if you blinked too slow. "You've worked night security before?" she asked, leading me down a long corridor that smelled like varnish and old paper. "Warehouse gig. Nothing like this," I admitted, "but I'm good alone. Quiet doesn't bother me." She gave me a tight nod. That's important. We passed by exhibits, Victorian mourning dresses, strange wooden dolls behind glass, a rusted iron cage labeled Egyptian Slave Shackle, circa 1640 BC, and reached a small office tucked beside the back stairwell. Meredith gestured for me to sit. "This place is particular," she said, sitting across from me. "You'll be responsible for monitoring cameras, doing walkthroughs on the hour, and logging any disturbances in the ledger." That seemed normal enough, but then she paused. Her fingers tapped once against the desk. "There are a few guidelines. They're not official, but they're important." I waited. This is where the weird usually sneaks in. "Don't go into the basement. It's sealed anyway. But if you hear noises from below, ignore them. We've had issues with the piping." She said it too fast, too rehearsed. I gave her a half smile. "Old buildings make noise. Got it." She nodded again. "Also, if you find an exhibit item moved from its case, log it, but don't touch it. Maintenance will reset it during the day." Now, that one caught me off guard. "They move on their own?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Log it, that's all." Before I could ask more, she stood and handed me a thin packet of keys. "Shift starts at 10 p.m. You'll relieve the current guard, Oscar. He'll get you oriented tonight." She walked me to the exit without another word. As I stepped outside into the pale afternoon sun, I turned back toward the museum's second-floor windows. Just for a moment, I thought I saw someone watching me. A face half obscured in the reflection of glass, long and expressionless. But when I blinked, it was gone. That night, I arrived early. Oscar, the outgoing guard, was already waiting near the entrance with a thermos and a pack of cigarettes in his hand. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "New guy?" he asked, offering a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah. You're Oscar?" "Unfortunately." He led me through the basics: security panels, camera screens, the floor route. He was efficient, but nervous. His hands shook just a little when he passed me the master key. Then he stopped by the Egyptian exhibit and glanced at the display case with the shackle inside. "That one's the worst," he muttered. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at the dark, curved piece of metal like it had insulted him. Sometimes it ends up on the floor. Sometimes there's nothing on the floor but dust, and it's in a different case. Don't ask me how. Just log it and move on." I nodded slowly. Meredith told me the same. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "She probably didn't tell you the other part." "What's that?" He lowered his voice. "Don't stay after 4 a.m., just don't. No matter what you hear or see. Leave before then, even if you have to leave something behind." I laughed, hoping it would ease the tension. It didn't. Oscar walked me back to the front, gave me one last look and said, "Good luck, man. You're gonna need it." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the exhibits. The museum at night was a different beast. During the day, I imagined it might have had a kind of stuffy charm. School kids yawning at dusty uniforms, elderly couples reading plaques like they held the secrets of the universe. But now, with the lights dimmed and the security monitors casting ghostly flickers across my desk, the whole place felt hollow, like it had exhaled after hours and was holding its breath again, waiting for something. At 10 p.m. sharp, I started my first walkthrough. The route was simple. Start in the east wing with the colonial displays, win through the industrial corridor, pass through the central atrium, and end in the Egyptian room before circling back. Meredith had left a clipboard for me to log anomalies, creaky floorboard here, blinking camera feed there. At first, I figured it would just be a long, quiet loop of boredom. I was wrong. The first wing, the colonial exhibit, was harmless enough. Musket racks, pewter dishes, a wax mannequin dressed like a redcoat who looked more bored than threatening. I made a few notes about a flickering light in the hallway and moved on. It wasn't until I reached the industrial corridor that things got strange. There's a mannequin near the back of that section, an old miner in dusty overalls hunched over a wheelbarrow. When I passed him the first time, I noticed a faint smudge on the glass of the display case, a handprint from the inside. I paused, checked the glass more closely. Yep, definitely on the interior. A dusty smear of 4 fingers and a thumb, pressed hard enough to streak through the film of grime. But the exhibit was sealed, locked behind thick glass, the kind that squeals when touched. I stared at it for a moment, waiting for my logical brain to kick in. Maybe Oscar leaned on the glass at some point. Maybe it's condensation. Maybe. Then my walkie buzzed. I jumped, nearly dropping my flashlight. The static was sharp and loud, like someone had keyed the mic but wasn't speaking. Hello?" I asked, pressing the button. No response. Just a faint hiss, like wind dragging through dry leaves. I released the button, waiting. Then I heard something that froze the blood in my veins. Breathing. It was slow, shallow, right in my ear. I turned off the walkie immediately. Whatever it was, I wasn't interested in hearing more. Trying to shake it off, I logged the smudge on the clipboard and moved on. The central atrium was wide and empty, with a vaulted glass ceiling that let in just enough moonlight to make every exhibit cast a shadow twice its size. The wax figures stood in silence. A soldier, a nurse, a jazz musician with a plastic trumpet halfway to his lips. I made a point not to look them in the eyes. The last part of my loop was the Egyptian exhibit. The air grew colder as I approached. I told myself it was just proximity to the outer wall or a busted vent, but it felt wrong, like the kind of cold you feel in your spine more than your skin. I reached the display case with the shackle. At first, I breathed a quiet sigh of relief. It was still there, curved, rusted iron, thick enough to hold an ox. The plaque beneath read, "Slave Shackle, Thebes, 1640 BC, recovered during the 1897 dig." property of Lord Densley Collection. It looked so unremarkable, just a loop of blackened metal, but something about it made me uneasy, like it was too still, like it was listening. I stepped closer, squinting through the glass, and that's when I saw it. The shackle had left a perfect ring of dust on the red velvet beneath it. It had been moved, not by much, maybe an inch or two, but enough that I could see the gap, like someone had gently nudged it and forgot to put it back. I stared at it for a long time. Was it like this before? Had Oscar forgotten to reset it? Had maintenance come in and adjusted the exhibit? Then I remembered Meredith's instructions. Don't touch it, just log it. So I did. But when I turned away, I saw my own reflection in the glass, and I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the mirrored pane of the case, a tall shadow stood a few feet back. No features, no face, just the vague silhouette of someone watching. I whipped around, heart pounding. Nothing. The hallway was empty, just rows of statues and glass. I stayed there, frozen for a full 30 seconds, waiting for something, anything to move. Then the lights above me flickered once, and everything went still again. I walked back to the security office with my heart thudding so hard it felt like it might punch through my ribs. I told myself it was nerves, that I was tired, that reflections can play tricks, that radios pick up interference, that old museums creak. But I couldn't stop thinking about that ring of dust, that something in the Egyptian case had been moved. And I was the only one there. By the time I got back to the security office, my nerves were frayed. I shut the door behind me, locked it, don't ask me why, habit I guess, and sat in the creaky swivel chair with my hands clenched too tight around the flashlight. The monitors buzzed softly in front of me, showing flickering views of empty hallways and dimly lit exhibits. Nothing out of place, nothing moving, but I couldn't stop staring at camera 9, the feed from the Egyptian wing. The display case with the shackle was front and center in the frame. Still, dark, unmoving, except I could have sworn the angle was slightly different than earlier. The velvet lining looked disturbed again. I leaned in closer, nose practically against the screen, trying to pinpoint what felt wrong. That's when something moved. Not much, just a flicker. In the upper corner of the feed, near the archway, a shape, like the ripple of fabric, barely distinguishable from the shadows. I rewound the footage 10 seconds, hit play, nothing, rewound it again, still nothing. I scrubbed frame by frame. The shadow was gone. I rubbed my eyes, blaming exhaustion, and turned back to the log sheet. I scribbled a note beside the entry about the moved shackle. Velvet disturbed again. Possible movement on camera 9. Will verify next patrol. I put the clipboard down, and the walkie crackled. I nearly knocked over my chair. This time, there were no whispers, no breathing, just static, short, sharp, and then silence. I picked it up slowly. Base to unit. Anyone there? I said, just to say something. Nothing. I turned the volume down and tossed it onto the desk. Then I noticed something strange on the monitor showing the east wing. Camera 3, focused on the colonial soldier mannequin, was showing an empty display. No mannequin, just the wooden base, spotlight flickering overhead. I sat bolt upright. No way. I had seen it earlier. A red coat with a fake musket and dead eyes. He'd been locked in place. I flipped through the feeds, camera 4, 5, 6, scanning for anything. The mannequin didn't appear on any of them. Grabbing the flashlight, I hesitated at the door. Logic said someone was messing with me. Maybe Oscar had come back to haze the new guy, Maybe there was a trick built into the museum to keep guards on edge. But I already knew better. I'd seen the dust ring. I'd seen the shadow in the glass. Still, I had to be sure. I stepped into the hallway. The building swallowed me instantly. Even with the flashlight, the air felt thicker now, heavier, like I'd just stepped into a sealed box with too little oxygen. The usual creaks and groans had fallen silent. No wind, no hum from the vents, just the sound of my own footsteps and a heartbeat that felt way too loud. When I reached the colonial exhibit, I stopped dead in my tracks. The display case was still open, and the red coat mannequin was gone. In its place, on the floor inside the case, were muddy footprints, not pristine museum tile prints. These were uneven, streaked with dirt and water, smudged across the floor like someone had stumbled. I followed the prints with my flashlight. They led out of the case, across the floor, and into the next hallway. I stopped. There were drag marks too, like a musket being pulled alongside. I backed away slowly. Then I heard it. A tap. Faint, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from down the corridor, past the industrial wing. It was sharp, like the end of a wooden cane or the butt of a rifle striking stone. I held my breath. Tap, tap, tap. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to the office, locked the door, and waited until dawn. But I didn't. I inched forward. When I reached the corner where the hallway turned, I pressed my back to the wall and peeked around it slowly. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the tapping had stopped. I took one careful step forward, and then a voice whispered, so close to my ear I could feel the breath. "You're not alone." I spun around. No one, just the dim hallway stretching back toward the colonial wing. The flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then held steady. I stood frozen, my skin cold, my breath ragged. When I finally made it back to the office, I slammed the door shut and locked it again. The camera feed from camera 3? The mannequin was back in its case, standing exactly how I'd first seen it. Musket raised, gaze blank, shoes clean. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I followed. And I knew something had walked those halls besides me. By the time the clock ticked past 2 a.m., I was already questioning my sanity. The mannequin had returned to its case. The footprints were gone. Even the drag marks had vanished like they'd never been there. I stared at the monitors, waiting for something, anything, to confirm what I'd seen. But the museum had gone still again. Silent, almost smug. It was like the place was gaslighting me on purpose. I sat hunched in the security chair, chewing on the inside of my cheek, when I noticed something odd on the desk. Tucked beneath the clipboard with my logs was a piece of old parchment. Brown-edged, curled at the corners like it had been pressed flat after years of storage. I didn't remember it being there. It wasn't typed or printed. It was handwritten. Thin, faded ink that looped in tight, slanted cursive. The kind you'd see in old ledgers or war diaries. There was no header, no introduction, just a list. Things you must not do during the night shift. Do not return a misplaced artifact to its case. Never speak to anything that looks like a guest. If you hear something breathing behind you, keep walking. Should you find the Egypt room open when it was locked, close it. But do not look inside. Never answer the phones. Leave by 4 a.m., even if you have to run. My skin prickled as I read it, line by line. This wasn't the same list Meredith had given me. This felt older, more desperate, like someone had written it on a last night they didn't survive. I read it again. Never speak to anything that looks like a guest. That line hit me in the gut. I thought about the whisper, the mannequin moving, the shadow I'd seen in the glass. Something, or multiple somethings, was active in this place, and someone before me had already learned the hard way what not to do. But why hadn't Meredith mentioned this? I flipped the paper over. No signature, no date, just the faint impression of something else, what looked like a partial fingerprint in dried reddish smudge. Blood? I folded the page carefully and slipped it into my back pocket. I didn't want to believe it was real, but part of me already knew it was. I decided to check the Egypt room again. I know what the rules said, but the doors had been locked when I passed through earlier. If they were open now, I'd just peek. No crossing the threshold, no eye contact with cursed mummies or whispering sarcophagi. When I reached the exhibit, the hall was colder, like walking into a freezer where the air was too dry to breathe properly, and sure enough, the heavy double doors were open, just wide enough to beckon. A soft gust rolled out from within, dry, still, carrying the faint smell of dust and something coppery underneath. I didn't want to look inside, but curiosity's a louder voice than reason. I took one step forward, not inside, just close enough to lean my head past the frame and shine my light in. The room looked unchanged at first. Display cases aligned in perfect rows, the shackle back in its original position, the velvet undisturbed. Then my light caught the far wall. A glass case stood there, tall and sealed, one I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a sarcophagus, black gold accents, strange carvings that pulsed in my vision if I stared too long. But it wasn't the coffin that made my stomach drop. It was the reflection. In the glass of the case, I saw myself, flashlight in hand, breath misting the air, and standing right behind me was a figure, tall, emaciated, wrapped in tattered cloth, its head tilted, jaw stretched too wide like it was trying to remember how to smile. I spun. Nothing. Empty hallway. I backed away from the exhibit, heart hammering. As I turned, the walkie on my hip crackled to life again. I didn't touch it. This time, a voice came through, faint, distorted. "Don't turn around." I froze. The air behind me changed, pressed inward, heavy. I remembered the list. If you hear something breathing behind you, keep walking. My fingers went numb. I forced myself to take one step, then another. The breath on my neck followed me, hot and shallow, a predator waiting to be acknowledged. I kept moving. When I reached the security office, I slammed the door and slumped to the floor, sweat clinging to my back like second skin. The monitors were black for a few seconds, every feed offline. Then, one by one, they blinked back on. Except camera 9, the Egypt room. That one stayed dark. I didn't sleep the next day. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I shut my eyes, I'd see that reflection. That thing behind me, staring through the sarcophagus glass like it had been waiting, smiling like it knew I'd look. When the sun rose, I sat in my dingy apartment eating cold toast, still clutching the old rules list I'd stuffed in my back pocket. I hadn't shown it to anyone. Part of me was scared it would disappear if I acknowledged it aloud, like the museum's way of punishing me for knowing too much. Still, when 9:45 p.m. rolled around, I drove back to Whitlow. Because of course I did. Because bills don't stop just because you're haunted. The place looked even worse at night now. The shadows around the building felt thicker, like they weren't the absence of light, but the presence of something else. Watching, leaning, listening. When I stepped through the front entrance, Meredith was waiting at the security desk. That was new. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice smooth, calm. Too calm. "Last night was Strange, I said carefully, testing her reaction. Her eyes scanned my face, then the clock on the wall. Was the shackle moved? Yeah, I said, and the red coat, and the Egypt room was open. She nodded as if she'd heard it all before. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. That happens around the third night. The museum adjusts. Adjusts? You're still here, she said softly. That's what matters. And with that, she walked off without another word. I started my patrol just before 10:30 p.m., flashlight in one hand, clipboard in the other. I skipped the colonial wing for now and went straight to the center atrium. I needed to ease into the madness, like dipping your toe into boiling water and pretending that'll make it hurt less. That's when I noticed something new. At the foot of the main display, a replica of an 1890s funeral carriage, sat a new item. A violin, not in a case, not behind glass, just resting delicately across the polished wood of the carriage bench. Its strings were dusty, and one was snapped. There was no tag, no placard, no exhibit card to explain why it was there, which was odd because everything in that museum had a label. I crouched and examined it closer. The wood was scratched, splintered along the edges, deep gouges along the scroll like it had been gripped too hard, and written in tiny etched lettering along the base of the neck were the words, "Play me, and you will see them." I stepped back so fast I nearly knocked over the clipboard. This wasn't in the catalog, I was sure of it. I made a quick note in the log. Uncatalogued violin appeared in atrium. Possible prank? Possible gift from donor? But even as I wrote it, I didn't believe it. I looked up and realized the jazz musician mannequin had turned his head slightly, angled now toward the violin, as if curious, or waiting. I blinked. The head was back in place. I left the atrium in a hurry. My next stop was the west hallway, the war relic corridor. Rifles, medals, a rusted helmet from World War I still stained with something dark and flaking, but tonight something else caught my eye, a new addition. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. A simple chair, wooden, rotted, with frayed rope tied to each leg. It sat alone under a harsh spotlight. The plaque beneath it read, "Execution chair, acquired 1932. Do not sit." There was something wrong with the shadows here. They didn't stretch normally. They pooled around the chair like a black oil spill, bubbling at the edges. I took one step closer. That's when I noticed the seat. There were scratches in the wood, dozens of them, some shallow, some deep, all carved into the grain with shaking, panicked hands. Words. "He's watching. Time bends here. Don't stay past 4. I felt a tightness crawl up my throat. Then, from behind me, I heard the faint creak of another chair. Wood groaning. I turned. The museum was empty. Still. But the air had changed, pressed in closer, tighter, like something had just stood up. I rushed through the rest of the walkthrough, eyes darting to every display, half expecting the walls to start breathing or the floor to split in two. When I finally returned to the security office, the violin was gone from the atrium feed. I checked the footage. It didn't vanish. It simply wasn't there to begin with, as if it had never existed at all. I checked the execution chair feed. Static. Camera 6 was down, and on camera 9, the Egypt room, there was still nothing but black. But now, something new had appeared in the top right corner of the screen. A shape, barely visible in the shadows, but I could see it. The shackle was no longer in its case. It was floating. The shackle was floating, not lifted by wires, not perched on anything, just hovering, a few inches above the velvet cushion in the Egypt room's case. Camera 9 was grainy and twitching, but the silhouette was clear, the metal loop turning slowly in midair like it was being weighed by unseen hands. I stared at the screen too long, trying to rationalize. Faulty camera? Optical illusion? But deep down, I'd run out of reasonable explanations. Whatever was happening in this museum wasn't meant to be understood, just survived. I reached for the walkie, intending to radio Meredith, but stopped halfway. Something about it felt wrong. Like the moment I pressed the button, I'd be inviting attention I didn't want. So I wrote it down instead. Log entry, 2:41 a.m. Shackle visibly levitating in case 9. Camera feed intact. Will verify on walkthrough. I barely finished the sentence before the temperature in the office dropped. Not like before. This was worse. My breath fogged in front of me. The monitors dimmed slightly, like someone was slowly sucking the electricity out of the room. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, flickered, then went out entirely, plunging everything into a heavy, crawling dark. Then, the walkie crackled, just static. And then, a voice I hadn't heard before, a whisper that wasn't quite human. The ones that moved, remember, I stood frozen, not breathing, my skin burning with goosebumps. The voice faded out with a hiss, but the silence that followed was worse, heavier. It felt expectant, like the museum was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd do something stupid. So, of course, I did. I left the office. I kept my flashlight aimed low as I walked, sweeping it across the floor and away from the exhibits. I didn't want to see reflections in the glass, not after what had happened last night. I passed through the West Hall. The execution chair was gone. Not moved, gone. In its place, just the dark imprint of dustless floorboards. A few more paces and I saw them. Footprints. They were bare, human-shaped, wet, leading away from the chair's spotlight and down the east corridor toward the Egypt room. I followed. The hallway lights dimmed the farther I went. The museum's electricity was still technically on, but it felt like the power had given up, like the building itself was being drained. The door to the Egypt room loomed ahead. It was wide open. I stopped just short of the threshold. The cold hit harder here. My hands trembled. Flashlight beam jittering across sarcophagi and stone slabs and relics that had no business still being intact after thousands of years. Then I saw the case with the shackle. The glass was shattered, outward. Shards lay on the floor, scattered like teeth, and in the center of the display, the velvet cushion was torn. The shackle was gone. My breath caught. I turned slowly, scanning the room. That's when I saw the statue, or what I thought was a statue. At the far end of the room, past the mummified hand display and a series of ancient tools, stood a tall, robed figure. Stone gray, eyes hollow, arms at its sides. I raised my flashlight to it. The beam flickered the moment it hit the thing's face. For a second, I could swear its head tilted, and on its wrist, half wrapped in rotting linen, was the shackle. It pulsed faintly, glowing with a red, slow heartbeat of light. I backed away, and that's when the other statues moved. 3 of them. I hadn't even noticed them at first, just columns of shadows beside old sarcophagi. But as I stepped away from the shackle-wearing figure, they shifted. Their feet scraped softly across the marble. One leaned slightly, its jaw stretching unnaturally wide as if testing the muscles for the first time in centuries. I turned and ran, down the hallway, through the atrium. Every step, I felt them following. Not close, but near enough that I never let up. Near enough that the lights above me died in sequence behind me. Near enough that I could feel the pressure of ancient eyes pushing against the back of my skull. When I reached the security office, the door was open. That was the final warning. Something had been inside. I grabbed the walkie from the desk with shaking hands and hit the button. "Meredith, are you there?" I hissed. Nothing. I tried again. "They're out. The exhibits, whatever's in them, it's loose." This time, the static faded into a familiar voice. "Oscar." "They only come out after night 3, he said softly. "That's when they start remembering where they were taken from." Then the line went dead, and I finally understood. The museum wasn't haunted, it was holding them back. And now, they remembered me. I barricaded the office door with everything I could find. The chair, the filing cabinet, even the brittle "Welcome to Whitlow Museum" sign I tore off the wall. It all felt laughably inadequate, like trying to stop a flood with duct tape. But I needed the illusion of safety. The monitors flickered in and out, each feed blinking like a dying eye. The Egypt room was still offline. The west corridor showed only static, and in the colonial wing, camera 3 pulsed once, then revealed something that froze the blood in my veins. The red coat mannequin was standing in the hallway, not in its case, facing the camera directly. I leaned in. His head was tilted ever so slightly, like he was listening, or waiting. I flipped to camera 5, the central atrium. Another figure stood by the funeral carriage now, a wax child mannequin that had always been seated in a Victorian schoolroom exhibit. She wasn't supposed to move, but there she was, standing by the violin I knew had disappeared last night, her head down, her fingers twitching, one broken arm raised just above the strings. She was about to play. I shut off the monitor. I couldn't watch anymore. Instead, I sat back and listened. And that's when I heard it. Music. A violin. Sour, scratchy notes dragged across unseen strings, like someone learning to play with broken fingers. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere all at once, filtered through vents, echoing through corridors, slithering under doors. The tune repeated itself every few bars. A lullaby, maybe, dissonant, unfinished. Then footsteps joined it. Slow, measured, heavier than my own. Multiple pairs. Something, or someone, was making its way down the hallway. I clicked off the flashlight and crouched behind the desk, clutching the walkie in one hand and holding my breath. The steps grew louder, closer, and then they stopped, just outside the door. A whisper followed. Not a voice I recognized, not Oscar, not Meredith. This one was old, heavy, foreign. "Give it back." I didn't answer. My hand slid toward the drawer where I'd stashed the handwritten rules list. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it one more time, to feel like there were still boundaries in this place. Still logic. But when I pulled it out, something had changed. New ink. A fresh line had appeared beneath the last rule. It read, "They know your name now." My stomach turned. On instinct, I turned on the walkie and whispered, "Oscar, if you're still listening, what do I do?" The response came almost immediately. Not static, but a click. 1, 2, 3, then silence. I didn't understand until I looked up. Camera 3, camera 5, camera 9. All three now showed the same hallway, the one leading to the security office, same shadows, same warping frame, same slow-moving figures. They were converging. I had minutes, maybe less. I fumbled through the emergency key ring and grabbed the master override for the east basement access. Meredith said it was sealed. But maybe, just maybe. I bolted from the office, leaving the barricade behind. The hallway was empty. For now. But the sound of the violin followed me, playing low and mournful like it knew it was my funeral march. I reached the east stairwell and descended. The museum had always told us never to go to the basement. It was unstable. Under renovation, storage for overflow exhibits. But now I understood what it really was: containment. The basement was colder than above, not by degrees, but by centuries. The moment I stepped off the last stair, the lights above blinked out, and I was in pure black. I turned on the flashlight and instantly wished I hadn't. The walls were covered in chains, not hanging, nailed in, like they'd been used to hold something inside. Crumpled display tags lay scattered across the floor. Artifact unlabeled, origin unknown. Removed from catalog, do not display. And on the far wall was a mirror, tall, cracked, wrapped in chicken wire and ancient prayer scrolls in 5 different languages. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat in reverse. I took a step closer, drawn to it. Then the violin stopped. Everything stopped. And in the mirror, I saw them. All of them. The red coat, the girl, the shackle-bound figure, the jazz musician, the execution chair, all standing behind me in perfect silence. But this time, I didn't turn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rules. I read the last line again. They know your name now. The violin started again. Only this time, it was inside the basement. The violin played slower now, less a song and more a summons. Each note stretched longer than the last, like the strings were fraying mid-bow. The sound curled along the basement walls, brushing my skin like breath. Behind me, their reflection stood motionless in the mirror. Watching, waiting. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I stepped backward, carefully, deliberately, keeping my eyes locked on the mirror as if breaking eye contact would release them. The prayer scrolls vibrated lightly, twitching against the glass like they were trying to warn me, or maybe hold the barrier intact just a little longer. And then I felt it, a presence behind me, cold, dense, wrong, not like a person, not even like a ghost, more like a memory that had learned to walk. My walkie crackled. I flinched. Daniel. That was my name. No one in the museum knew my name. I hadn't told Meredith. I'd never said it on the walkie. But the voice on the other end wasn't asking. It was confirming. And somehow, that was worse. I bolted. Up the stairs, skipping steps, heart thudding so hard I thought it might snap my ribs from the inside out. I didn't look back. Not when the prayer scrolls tore free, not when the mirror screamed with static, not when I heard footsteps that didn't echo. The museum above wasn't the same. The lights were off. Every exhibit case was open. Every mannequin gone. The funeral carriage was overturned in the atrium. The violin lay on the floor in splinters, and written across the tile in lupin, wet script was a single sentence. We remember what you took. I didn't take anything. I hadn't touched a thing. But that didn't seem to matter anymore. I made for the main entrance, slamming into the doors with my full weight, and stopped cold. They wouldn't open. The locks had engaged. Automatic, probably. Scheduled to release at 6 a.m. But I remembered Oscar's warning. The rules. Leave by 4 a.m., even if you have to run. I checked the time. 3:53 a.m. The hallway lights flickered back on, just for a moment, and all of them were standing there, in perfect formation. The red coat, the girl, the shackle wearer, the robed figure, the wax child, all of them, silent, still, but each one was a little closer than before. I turned and ran, not toward the office, not toward the basement, but toward the west corridor. The fire exit was there. Maybe the alarm would trip, maybe I'd lose my job, maybe they'd arrest me. But that was the point. The museum couldn't keep what it couldn't contain. I slammed against the red crash bar. It groaned, stuck for a second, like it had to think about whether or not I deserved to leave, then burst open. I fell into the night air, cold, wet, real. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't check the cameras. I just ran. I didn't quit. There was no one to quit to. The next day, the museum was closed, permanently. The news cited structural damage, unaccounted inventory loss, and budget cuts. A full shutdown. No forwarding contact for Meredith. No trace of Oscar. Even the museum's website vanished within 24 hours. But I knew the truth. They sealed it. Not to protect the artifacts, to protect us. It's been 3 months. I don't talk about that place, not often, but sometimes when I'm alone I hear the violin again, out of nowhere. Just a few notes, one broken string, and once I found a tag in my mailbox. It was museum standard, laminated. The label read, Artifact 377, Daniel. Current status, displayed. I burned it, but the tag keeps coming back. Folded in my glove box, pressed inside my fridge. Once, taped to my bathroom mirror, like they're reminding me. I walked through their halls. I learned their names. I followed the rules, but I stayed too long. And now, I'm part of the collection.